Before we start today's roundtable, I want to give special thanks to Checkster, our group sponsor. Checkster has become well known in the recruiting industry by providing a platform that easily captures reference checks in the hiring process. I myself have been a customer of theirs for years. I use a reference checking tool for all of my new hires. However, Checkster has now released a new product suite called Insights. This new product suite is really what has excited me to have Checkster as the group sponsor. With Insights, the Checkster platform now covers employees from cradle to grave and not just reference checking, starting when they apply, going to offer, through onboarding, then covering their work at your company, and then to the end with exit interviews. It's an easy to use, easy to understand way of giving and getting feedback from your peers. Checkster's simple goal, to build more productive and passionate teams. Now, if this concept of getting insights from your peers regarding your work sounds familiar, it should, because that's the simple goal of this group. Connecting, communicating, collaborating. Support me, support the group. Follow the link below, recruiting.org/Checkster. This will take you to a landing page to sign up for a quick demo. If you are just thinking about automating your reference checking process, it'll be well worth your time. But I encourage you to check out the full Insights suite. I'd love to find out if you feel the way I feel about it. Now let's get to today's roundtable. All right, let's jump right into it. Thank you everybody for attending episode 76 or 75. I forgot to write it down, and my apologies. In Let's Talk Recruiting, where peer practitioners in the TA industry all get together and talk about various topics. Today's topic, before I get into that, let me do one quick housekeeping item, and that's in regards to chat. I encourage any and all audience members to add any comments or questions or anything that you want to add to the conversation in the chat area. But before you do that, you click on that little chat window. Zoom defaults that to say to all panelists. I want everybody to change that drop-down menu to say all panelists and attendees. Those panelists, we don't want to hoard the conversation. We want it to be shared by any and all. So please go down there, change that drop-down menu to say all panelists and attendees. With that said, let's jump into today's topic, recruiting by the numbers, defining formulas we use for metric reporting. So I myself have been in operations for quite a while. Reporting has often found its way to my desk. I really like doing it. I think it gives a lot of insight to what goes on in a large recruiting program and even a smaller size recruiting program. So knowing your numbers, I think, is good for any senior recruiter to know, especially if you're a TA leader and you're having those business conversations with the business line. I think it's vital to kind of know your numbers. So with us today, we have Sean Hanna out of New York City, William Uranga out of Phoenix, and Lance Bull out of Houston should be joining us. If not, we'll carry on. And Yvette Camperin out of San Francisco, and Ryan Reeder out of Denver and Salt Lake City. Right, I'm gonna throw both those locations in for you. All right, so let's stop sharing. Sean, how about we jump over to you and have you start off the conversation? But first I have to ask you, did your mother have a crush on Sean Connery and that's how you got your name? Because that's how I got mine.
I actually don't know. I'll have to ask her next time. So
that's how I got mine.
So I assumed it was my Irish heritage.
Oh yeah, I'm not Irish, just got the name and green eyes. But yeah, I had to pay homage to Sean Connery this week. I was reminded by my mother, hey, your namesake just passed away. All right, sorry, I digress. Let's jump over to you and your item.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit biased in this area. Calibra, the company I work for, essentially we are focused in the data intelligence space. So really our product helps companies, unlock the value of data. And a big part of that is kind of understanding the data and understanding where to find it and essentially what that data means. So we actually use our tool internally, even within the people team, both in recruiting, which I'm focused on, and even just more broadly in HR. And we essentially build a catalog of all the business terms and all the metrics that we report on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. So what I actually thought I would do is just kind of walk through the methodology of how we actually do that. Obviously, we're using our own tool, but this can kind of be done outside of a tool. It's just kind of general principles that we find really effective in helping us get better adoption, help with understanding, and make sure people truly know what they're looking at when they see any kind of numbers reported. And so there's probably a couple of ways we think about this. First and foremost, goes without saying, is the definition, right? What is the actual definition of the metric you're measuring? So when we think about that, it's just, in general business terms, what is that you're measuring, but also what is the impact and what is the purpose? So in many cases, we're measuring and we're showing different data points, but there's generally a purpose, right? We're trying to either hit a goal, it's tied to an OKR, or we just want to explain to people why it's important that we look at that. Kind of on the more technical side, we also define and document the calculation rule. So how we're actually coming up with that number. So for example, that's probably where you're going to get most of your questions. How do you define this number? Where did you get this number or percentage from? So we really think about that effectively as well. Frequency is another thing that we actually also document. We make sure that we define how often we're actually showing that number. So is it weekly? Is it monthly? Some metrics it's important we show every day. Some metrics it's only worthwhile looking on a more quarterly basis. Benchmarking, another important one. So where applicable, we define the target value. Like what are we actually trying to hit? If we're looking at an offer acceptance rate, what is the good? What is the measurement of good? We focus a lot on diversity. What is that also measurement of good? And then obviously probably two of the most important ones I've left for last is ultimately where to find it, right? So sometimes, if you're more mature and you have a lot of different reporting repositories, you're using different BI tools like Tableau or Power BI, it can be difficult to find these metrics. So we make sure anytime we actually document and define it, we also show people where to find it. So we give them links to those reports. That's been really effective for us in terms of people being able to search and find the ultimate report. And then the last is really that stakeholder engagement. So defining who's responsible for this metric, who is the person that's the owner, so who's creating and defining the metric, who is your subject matter expert, so who's the person that maybe knows the business context on it, defining who that person is as well may be different than the person that's the actual owner. And then last but not least, we also identify a business steward. So a business steward may be the person that's essentially accountable for that function. So if we think about, offer acceptance rate or numbers we're showing on diversity, that could be potentially our head of D&I versus our head of talent acquisition. So it's really important for us to define those as well. And those are kind of generally what we do for anytime we're publicizing metrics, we go through all those steps, make sure those documented. And generally through that process, it helps with alignment, gets acceptance, and then sort of gets people excited about those metrics that we're showing for our recruiting team.
Sean, when you say documenting, what can you be a little kind of literal on that? Are you talking about putting like the responsible parties in a Word doc, in a spreadsheet? Can you get a little literal on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're actually using, our tool Calibra actually does that for companies. So some of you who are maybe more in the financial or insurance industries may be familiar with Calibra or seen it at your company. We essentially have that built out, but this can ultimately be done like in a Google Doc or in a Word doc as well. If you're not using a tool like Calibra or a business glossary tool, it's really easy to define it. It's just more about documenting it, keeping it in one place, and keeping it up to date ultimately.
No, William, I'm going to bring in ATAP in here real quick on the conversation. To back to you, Sean. Do you know are you a member of the Association of Talent Acquisition Professionals, ATAP for short?
I believe I am.
Okay. You are?
A couple of us are, I guess.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Sean. Are you?
No.
So I highly recommend somebody in your role and position and the kind of company you work for to check them out. And William, if you want to add to any of my descriptions of it, jump in. I think you're probably more involved in it than I am. But it's atap.org, right? That's no. What is it? What's the URL, William?
Tapglobal.org.
At atapglobal.org. It's an association of recruiting professionals, TA professionals. The reason why I bring it up is because they have a really good sourcing metric doc. I don't know if they go beyond the sourcing piece of it, but they get into a lot of the points that you were describing, like the definition, purpose, calculation, audience. Great starting doc if you're looking at starting to put things on from pen to paper in a company from a TA perspective. Highly recommend checking that out. But let me jump into your target value. So when you're doing your reporting, whether it's on a BI tool or Excel or in a PowerPoint, when you're doing your presentations to whichever audience, are you highlighting the target values? And that's basically a goal, right?
absolutely. So we use Tableau as our business intelligence tool for actual visualizing reporting. So we very heavily use the reference line feature. So you can actually, anytime you're reporting something, you can actually add a reference line to show either what's the benchmark or the goal. So a couple of the ones that we do is, we have internal goals for offer acceptance rate. But when we report any kind of diversity numbers, either the diversity of our total candidate pool or diversity of those that were interviewed, we also compare that against the LinkedIn Talent Insights benchmarks for gender diversity. So we always kind of show that contextually within the reporting, so people get a sense of what is good and if they are above or below that benchmark.
Okay, so that was going to be another question of what are you benchmarking against? So you're benchmarking against LinkedIn?
Yes, for gender diversity, we use Talent Pool. We also just use a lot of the publicly disclosed company diversity. So generally, you tend to find that's with larger companies. We're smaller, we're about 650 employees. So it's difficult to compare ourselves against the likes of Google and Facebook. We're looking for people more on our own range, size, revenue. So we sometimes we'll go for Radford benchmarks if it's applicable to the size of the industry that we're looking for too.
So a question back to you, but also for the panel as a whole too. So that's one of my always big questions is, hey, once you figure out where you stand, if you start tracking over time, you can see if you're improving or if you're declining against yourself. But kind of question for the panel, once you know where you're at, how do you tell if you're good or you're bad, right? It goes, typically you have to use a type of benchmarking process, right? And then finding to me, it's always been hard to find good benchmarking data and the kind of data that I can kind of drill down into. I'll give you a use case for me. Some years back, Silicon Valley area, computer gaming, there's kind of an accusation that the company that I was at was not hiring enough women gaming software engineers. So we had to prove that, well, actually, not only we at that level, we're above that role based upon the talent market space. So it turned out to be a lot of hands-on research on our own versus having that benchmarking data. But bigger question to the panel, how are you comparing yourselves to industry, to location? Where are you getting your benchmarking data if you are? Anybody in the panel?
I think that's really the biggest challenge because like you mentioned, there's just not a lot of benchmarking data out there to go and compare to. One of the things that we look at on the data piece and where are we at is, of course, being a government contractor, we have to meet certain data specifications and be at certain points. So we do a lot of, basis and analysis off of that versus, hey, what's happening out on, we are looking at the markets all the time, of course, but what's happening on the market, we're really benchmarking against, here's what, our AAP says, here's where the OFCCP thinks we should be, those types of things. So I would say that's probably where we're benchmarking off of, but it's a challenge. It's something that I've asked myself, and I just recently changed companies about a year ago. And even as I benchmark current company to previous company where I was at, it's companies are so different and unique. And to compare company to company is just not even fair, first of all. And second of all, unless you can get hundreds of companies agreeing to dump their data together where you can benchmark it better, I think that's the challenge we face on the talent acquisition side, particularly.
I'll second what Ryan's saying, and often I actually use LinkedIn to develop my own kind of custom benchmarking by reaching out to people. I noticed Daniela had mentioned here that her company didn't have any direct competition, and I would certainly say in our location we don't have any direct competition as far as products, but we certainly do on the talent side. So talking with the other companies, figuring out who else is, in our case, software development or data engineering prone, and what they're experiencing, at least informally, is a great way to kind of build trust, and then sharing data as far as what they're seeing, depending on what's of particular importance. And if you have a large enough group, and have enough time, which is another key factor. Sometimes you can start creating your own surveys if you're trusted to do it blindly with everybody else reporting, and kind of do a little mini Radford, but of whatever the data is that you're trying to measure and create the metrics for.
Does anyone on the panel, and a question I have, because it's one I've been trying to get, is does ATS or CRMs, I mean, they have a ton of data from a lot of companies, but they're very rarely willing to share even the overall data. Not, you know, I don't want the specific data, but are they willing to share more AI information and benchmarking that way? But I haven't had much success, as much success with that, but does anybody else have success? Does that work?
Yeah, Ryan, we use Greenhouse currently, and they're very selective on what they'll essentially give you by customers. So some things they'll share like EEOC response rates or potentially like high level CSAT results. But in terms of more granular details, they keep those a little bit closer to their chest, I find.
Yeah, I would add to that, even if you could get a bunch of data, like that, a good amount of quantity data, I would then question and this gets back to the topic of the day, well, how are you defining it, right? And then are you updating your ATS? Is it accurate, right? What's the quality of that data? To kind of having that bar to, yes, we make sure our ATS is updated once a week. We have accurate metrics versus just kind of filling it in once the rec is filled. It's kind of like a horse apiece with companies, in my experience, where some teams do it really well and are very into it, and some just, they get to it when they get to it, as long as they do some updating before they close the rec out. So to me, in my experience, it's all come down to that TA leader and their expectations. And that's usually quite determined by C-level's expectations that they want to see out of the TA team, is kind of that guiding point. I've seen some great teams. I've seen some, you could room for improvement type teams. All right. Thank you very much, Sean. I want to make sure we keep moving because it's kind of an in-depth conversation. William, let's jump over to you.
Yeah, hi, William Uranga. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition at Spokio for the past, I think it's about 2.5 years already. Time flies. Would certainly agree that just what you were talking about there, Sean, with regards to not only having good data in your ATS, but also good, solid workflow and practices that you're consistently following. If you're not auditing that, then be suspect of your data not being totally up to snuff. Over the past couple of companies I've been with, we've built out dashboards, which are probably for me, for what I've seen, probably the highest form of metrics for our executives. But that requires a lot of work down below. So talking about what do we need in recruiting, which could be different than what the executives want to see. What does HR need? What are our client business units need as far as hiring leaders and their executives? So depending upon who the audience is, we usually try to get some sort of synergy going on with the metrics that we need. Certainly the stuff in our recruiting team is much more granular, much more activity based or program oriented. Whereas the higher up you go, the bigger the numbers, or bigger the chart, the bigger the picture goes. They're looking more for right track, wrong track as far as how it impacts the rest of the business, and or if indeed it's being benchmarked against an industry, how are they doing compared to the industry? So making sure that there is complete unity around definitions, frequency, how it's published, how it's put out, how it's stored and accessed. It's super important for the recruiting team also to understand what their behaviors do in impacting those numbers all the way up to the top, because I found that makes great context for them to make better decisions as they go about their day. And it's probably even more important now that we are remote, as a lot of folks are, thanks to COVID. If you're going to manage staff, if you're going to manage expectations, you better have this stuff very well defined. You can maybe start out really, really simple if this is a starting point for you, but always be asking, what do we do next and better? For example, if your survey is scoring 100% or near 100%, switch up the questions, go deeper, go further back in your workflow and ask the survey participants, say if it's your candidates, for more data. Always be looking for ways and opportunities for improvement. as a way of using either the analytics or the reporting. But we usually put out what we call quarterly business reviews. Those are the big numbers. That's usually going all the way up to the executives. Dashboard could have anywhere of, I don't know, I've seen anywhere from about 4 to 12 dials, depending upon what is of key concern to the executives. And that's going to vary from industry to industry, or even company and size and maturity. We have just now moved from being in Google spreadsheets, which is where we've been living the past few years. And now we're actually doing a BI connector to Tableau. I think Sean was talking about that a little bit earlier. So we're looking to free up some people hours instead of having to manually tabulate within accounting and get those numbers to have it almost nightly updated. And we're really looking forward to be able to then do more slicing and dicing with Tableau and ask the other questions that keep coming up. Because, you know, when you put together a report or analytics, there's always going to be another question. Well, how does it slice for this? Or what's the metric behind this one? And you need to be ready to answer those questions. That isn't always a hostile situation. It is just curiosity, wanting to understand your part of the business, which I take is an awesome indicator when they kind of lean in and start asking those sort of questions. So that's kind of what we're doing right now at where we are at Spokio.
It can turn hostile if the data's off. So,
oh yeah. Well, yeah, my CTO, if it's off by a tenth, it is noticed and it is asked. So yes, double check, triple check. If you're too close to numbers, have somebody else look at it. It is always good, not only to have accurate numbers, but also understand the dynamics behind it. So you're able to explain and connect the dots from I say storytelling, and I mean that in a good way, not in a, I'm making something up for you. But so people understand the dynamics behind it. So you can actually frame the conversation around what's needed from staff, resources, or budget, which is usually where those things ultimately point to.
And if you're a one-person show doing this, ask for a second set of eyes, because I'll speak from experience. You can get tunnel vision pretty quick. And yes. I used to walk my information out to the director of comp. Hey, can you look at my numbers? I don't know anything about recruiting. I just need a second set of eyes, and you're the only eyes I can find.
They add up, yeah. And particularly when you start getting deep into some of the formulas, I'll get lost. And so I've learned more as a result of saying, how come this got off, or you know, got an error message, and that's great. In fact, I'll probably be, I don't know if I'll be the first, but I'll certainly be one of the first on my team to be taking the Tableau course as well, just to learn the tool. So I noticed here, this is Audrey's asking, do you have examples of questions you use? If this is talking about the customer or the candidate experience survey, I'm happy to share with anybody our candidate survey questions if they want to email me, and I'll if it's okay, I'll go ahead and put my email address in there, and people can hammer me for that. So
sure. Real quick, so Tableau has been mentioned twice. I myself am starting to utilize that for reporting. It seems to be taking over the world for the most part, right? It's going everywhere. If you are interested, or your company uses Tableau, if you go on YouTube, one of the HR operations managers at Tableau has done a couple conferences, and she's put her videos up on YouTube. So if you go on YouTube, search for Tableau HR metrics, she runs through her deck, and it's pretty interesting, the kind of the questions that you can answer there. But so William, let me put this back to you, kind of focusing on the audience and the information delivered to them. So let's say you're at a company that, hey, you don't have access to Tableau or a BI tool. What type of format? I'm trying to get literal here, a little bit deep. If my audience is my recruiting team, is Excel files okay? If my audience is the C-level or what have you, do I got to go in with at least PowerPoint? Or if there is the BI tool, step up my game and present in that BI tool, because that's the language the business speaks in. When it comes like to the little format, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the team, I try to keep it to the lowest common denominator for the team, and right now that's Excel or Google Worksheet. Mainly because I'm asking for them to do some reporting. I want them to know their own numbers. I don't want me telling them, hey, here's, they should know before I do where they stand. And so to the degree that they can use basic reporting, your ATS, or most of them allow you to download it in a CVS CSV, excuse me, format, and then put it in a spreadsheet. That's easy enough to do. When for clients, sometimes even a funnel report on the group of positions or positions that you're working on as a recruiter is good enough simply to show here's where we are, here's historically where we've been, and here's the bottleneck or something like that, to be able to illustrate. But certainly for at least my CXO level, yeah, they're wanting to see month over month, quarter over quarter changes and some sort of trend as far as trying to pin it to events or changes or decisions that we've made, right or wrong, and how they've impacted what we're doing.
Yeah, I would say trend line reporting is the most interesting to that C-level suite, not just what's our number today or what have you. All right, thank you. Lance, can we jump to you?
Yeah, so I guess one of the key things that I find, so I report directly into the chairman. He truly values recruiting, which is great. And basically, I was tasked when I came in to basically build an internal retained search firm. And so that's what we have. And so from our metrics, we measure ourselves very similar to how a Korn Ferry would measure itself in terms of days to fill. At the high level, the number that John always looks at is what is our actual fees, what is our total fees saved versus our actuals in terms of all expenses or all costs associated with recruiting. So that includes our salaries, overhead, all of our our LinkedIn, and that also includes any fees we do pay. So we do have some searches, very few, where we will leverage a third party, and we also are big believers that we're not going to not hire the best candidate just because there's a fee. So typically today, this year we have a couple where they're confidential searches and so forth. Today we're at about 90% filled internally with my team, and we're about 1.6 million in fees saved versus our entire talent acquisition budget. So we're 1.6 million ahead. And then, as we've said that we are a retained, we're acting like a retained search firm, then, we look at days to fill and, manage ourselves, against best in class. So for the most senior executive searches, similar to what a Korn Ferry would be, our goal is to be in 90 days. For the most senior executive searches, things have extended a little bit this year with COVID as we try to manage through that process. But at the highest level, John Poindexter, our chairman, wants to know, how much money did you make me, or how much money did you save me? And that's important.
No, are you in a suit or in tie? Well, not suit and tie, but in the tie because of the executive search vibe? I gotta ask.
John still wears a suit and tie. I report to John, so I still wear a suit and tie. Most of our business are business casual, and most of our team, even here at corporate, is business casual. But our executive team is still pretty much old school suit and tie.
Yeah, I'm just kind of joking with you. So, so you're so I've worked a lot in the past doing consulting with sourcing teams, right? Helping companies get strategic with outbound recruiting, what you're doing to a whole other level than what I've done. And to your point that, hey, what was our executive search spend last year, or just third party spend last year compared to what it is now? And that was always a key metric with sourcing teams. To your point, how much are we saving the company money? I worked at other places where they would add any internal hire that they made, they would do 20% against that salary. Hey, if this would have gone out to search, this is how much would it cost us? Because they were fighting business units using third-party spends. So I think that's a great metric to track. Usually I've only seen it at companies that are strategic about outbound recruiting versus just, processing those that apply. To the other panelists too, like Lance, are you tracking that third-party spend in any of your metrics?
Yes, and when we get to me, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but with some of the pieces. But yeah, that third-party spend. I came to the company I'm at a year ago, and that's all they used was third-party, and they decided that was not the most costly effective way. So we've got a team in place, so we're tracking it pretty heavy.
Yeah.
I guess when I started with JB Pico, I was the first one in the role, and we were at about 10% of the searches were filled in with not using agencies, so about 90%, and now we're about 90% the other way, where 90% of our searches are filled internally. And really, in most cases, the ones that are not are primarily confidential searches or very, very unique searches where, we really want some expertise. We don't do a lot of in the past, we haven't done a lot of IT hiring because there's firms that are just so good and they have such a strong database. I'd rather have my team focused on the more senior searches.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we look at cost of hire, cost of application metrics, and we look at it by channel. So yes, we do capture third party. I even measured my staff as far as what they get paid as part of the cost too. So we're pretty inclusive. So travel for candidates, when you used to do that, the various different sourcing tools, whether they're used for sourcing or for job posting, we split it out, paid, free, and so forth.
And where are people getting that third-party spend amount from? In my past, it's been, you got to walk down to accounts payable, and they're the ones that have the true number, because the hiring manager, if they went kind of rogue, may or may not tell you about it. But is that where you're getting your number?
Oh, no. You have to get complete alignment inside as to who can sign agencies and contracts. And if you have that alignment, then I have all the invoices come by me. So nobody can sneak one in there. And if you've got buy-in from your chairman, your CEO or CFO, great, awesome. That certainly also prevents accidental agreements or something like that with a buddy or something like that. Yeah.
Yvette, you're saying something?
I was just going to echo that, my experience is growing startup. So I actually, finance would come to me on those costs and making sure we're in line, and cost per hire is a factor, but also it is more important to get the right hires. But yeah, I would track everything on my own, because like William said, I'm the one negotiating those contracts and making sure we have a pretty reasonable agency fee if we take it out to agency. But my job is to actually build internal recruiting teams. So my job is to slowly wean off agencies.
Yep, I absolutely agree. All right, excellent. Yvette, let's sort of just keep rolling with you and jump over to your item.
Okay, great. I'm Yvette. I'm in the Bay Area. Like you mentioned, I basically start with startups. That's what I've been doing. The last 4 companies I've been with have been smaller startups where I'm building the team from scratch, or I've acquired a team. So I really love the fast growing. My companies have been B2B tech, and everybody that has mentioned reporting, I definitely do that. A lot of it comes out of I'm using a lot of the Google Sheets and hope to one day transfer over to Tableau or Looker so that it's a little bit easier. But having dashboards definitely is a really key. But for me, my mission is to build an efficient and effective talent organization. And so benchmarking from historically what the teams have been able to hire and doing it per department, because technology, hiring engineers is a lot different than hiring for go-to-market. So I like to keep those metrics separate. And so if the OKRs for the company is to hire X amount of salespeople or an X amount of engineers per quarter, I like to look at history of, well, how many have you been able to hire so far, and what's the speed of hire? And getting those metrics are really important. So for me, usually when I get on board with a company, there's a pipeline issue, or they're using a lot of agencies, but they're just not able to hire quick enough. That's usually the most common reason. And so when I dive in, I like to really look at the data in terms of pass-through rates, because for the most part, especially if companies are using a lot of agencies and we're just starting to hire the internal recruiting team, that top of the funnel is full of just tons of candidates, but the middle of the funnel, there's just tons of holes, right? So I like to analyze if my recruiter is the number of candidates they're getting, and how many recruiters are, phone recruiter calls are they making? And out of those calls, what's the amount going to the hiring manager? And if the hiring manager is looking at that and they're wanting to talk to, 50% or, measuring 50% or 80%, if it starts out at 50, maybe you're not really in a good alignment. And so what I tell my recruiters is that you want to get to that point where the hiring manager trusts that you know what they're looking for. Right. So as a new recruiter, it's always like, testing the waters. And then from the hiring manager's interview, how many is that hiring manager passing on to the next stage? And you just evaluate each stage to look for those holes. And most of my time has been spent on making sure that the interview teams and the hiring manager are aligned with what is a must-have requirement and what's a nice-to-have. So this is really more detailed stuff that I love to get out of the ATSs I use, which is Greenhouse and Lever, because they actually track a lot of that data. So I'm really involved in making sure that the recruiter is in line with the hiring manager and the hiring teams, because if you are doing a great job with your hiring manager and the manager is feeling like, okay, these candidates hit the mark, they have the must-have skills, let's go ahead and move them to the next stage, which could be a technical screen or an on-site interview. And after that, are the candidates failing? Are they failing after a technical screen? So you want to measure like, well, okay, what questions are we asking? How are we evaluating these candidates? Because we can't just keep filling in the top of the funnel. Are we being efficient in how we're asking job-related questions? And so I like to do the historical data. We do interview training and talking with the recruiters on building some kind of a framework per job so that they know the job really well. And any interviewer that's part of that job, they know that framework as well. And then measuring over time, are we getting better at, the funnel, so that when we, especially like offer acceptance rates, that's a big one. For me, you spend all that interview time, and for a software engineer in the Bay Area, sometimes companies have a 50% acceptance rate. Ouch, all of that time. Whereas like, how can we better with the candidate experience so that by the time we give that person the offer, you're pretty sure 80% that they're going to accept it. And so a lot of that interview time doesn't go to waste.
That kind of drilling down into like the funnel reporting on active and open requisitions versus the summary data, right? So my past, hey, those open recs, we're looking at data and reporting weekly. And then on a quarterly reporting, we'll look at like summary type information. Kind of drilling down into that open rec reporting, are you looking at on a weekly basis? And typically what I've seen is like a TA leader will be doing their one-on-ones, looking at that type of weekly reporting with their recruiting team. Does that fall in line with how you're leading your teams?
Yes, definitely. Because if you move backwards from like historically, we need to hire 10 engineers or something, but our 50% acceptance rate means that we have to get 20 engineers to that final round in order to, if we're going to track that, and you just back it up. So I like to do it for like a sales team when you've got your quota to hit and the numbers and how you're tracking. I do that with my recruiters on making sure that every week, based on the numbers and you're backing it out, I need to give 2 offers a week. And if I'm not tracking at 2 offers a week, I'm not going to hit my hiring goals for the quarter. Does that make sense? So it is a weekly thing for the recruiter for their specific jobs.
And I don't mean to, oh, go ahead, William, you can say something?
I was just going to add that, no, it's super helpful to have these sort of this awareness, because this goes into not just coaching of your recruiters, but also indication where you may need to do some training. And not just of your recruiters, it could be the hiring managers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Too. I know at GoDaddy, probably one of the great moves we did is on our QBRs, we would actually show the business unit segmentation as far as how one business unit is going against the other. So to have the CIO and CTO both look at their data and go, how come you've hired more women than I have? And have that conversation go on, that's golden. Because then you've got some amazing leverage there that you didn't have before. You don't have to plead your case. You've got friendly, inter squad, if you will, rivalry going on, which is awesome to use.
Yeah, I think diversity hiring is really a hot button now. So looking at those numbers in terms of your diverse candidates going into the top of the funnel, where are they falling out? That's really important to see too. And then do we need to rework the questions that we're asking? How structured is your interview process? Are you changing the interview questions based on somebody's background? Or are you really crafting good job related questions that you're going to ask every single candidate so that you're gathering very strong data to make better hiring decisions?
So let me ask a question around the hiring against plan, right? I think that's what you're addressing about. Do we look at when we're hiring against plan, hey, we want to grow to, let's just say 20 additional headcount, whichever department or company wide. So that's our hiring against plan. Let's say we're at a company, we're good enough where our hiring teams are planning it out. It goes in the system, we can plan. Do we look at, when it comes to rec load with recruiters, and we can see the rec load coming when it's hiring against plan, are we also looking at backfill recs? So the turnover rate as applied to expectations for growth. Yeah. I started doing reporting where you see your rec load and it's divided by net new versus backfill. When you see this high bar for backfill, which means more unexpected work for the recruiters, makes it hard to plan or harder. Is anybody looking at, when it comes to hiring against plan, kind of also paying attention to the backfill recs coming through?
I could just speak to that quickly. I have a different recruiting capacity Excel spreadsheet, right? And it actually has the number of recruiters I have and their rec loads. And then I have to estimate I just ask the HR people or your business partner, what are we trending every month on attrition for engineers? And what is it for go-to-market? And again, I keep those separate because in the Bay Area, it is a different, you get better data if you keep it separate, because the interview cycles are a little bit different and some take longer than others. But I definitely will add in just an estimated 2 per month, based on the companies that I work with that are usually less than 1,000.
Yeah, Sean, I'll say from our perspective, when we think about progress to plan, we use a capacity model. So we assign points based on different factors of the rec. So, level, what has been the historical time to fill those. And what we've also started to do recently is also look historically at what the diversity pipeline is for some of those jobs historically. And if it's lower, we give them more points because, preaching to the choir here, but we all know when, less resources, it's really harder to find and spend the time sourcing diverse candidates. So we want to make sure that when we're thinking about progress to plan, we're also building in capacity so that we can do the right diversity sourcing.
That's a great point, what Yvette and Sean bring up, because it's not just only talking about what's been happening or what's currently happening, but it should also serve as a point of reference for planning. So the next time you see a spike of attrition, they can go, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Well, we have some numbers, so we know what we have done, and we should be able to talk about it. Maybe we don't go do a whole bunch of hires and replace them. Maybe it's better that we outsource that or fill it with contractors. I mean, the best thing we can do from a talent acquisition standpoint is provide viable options to our customers, and may not always be hiring.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. That's why you need to be part of that discussion when they're planning.
Yeah, It helps a lot, especially if you're looking for headcount budget.
Mm-hmm. And then you want to measure over time and show the teams, and the teams actually need to have that goal as well. They can't be like, not be aware that we're trying to double the size of our engineering team and they're being an interviewer. They need to know, they need to feel the pain, you know, that like basically let's be very good about how we're assessing candidates, because we can't just, you know, you stress the interview teams out and they get interview fatigue. So we got to be very efficient.
Got it. Excellent. All right, Ryan, let's jump over to you and your items that you had.
Yeah, so I'm probably going to go a little different direction, but one of the things that we're constantly looking at is how do we measure data and use really the recruiting funnel as a marketing funnel, and where does that fall? So things that we're looking at, for example, we're constantly starting to review, especially for production sales employees. It's much easier to get if it's, you know, data analysts, or if you're HR or other departments, it's a little harder. But what's the break-even point when an employee starts their employment? And so, you know, if it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, you know, what does that break-even point from a production and type of matrix look like? And so what I've been able to do with some of that, with that data, is really go back and partner with sourcing and really take that data back and say, look, this source, for some reason, this source allows our new hire employees, our candidates that we just put through the recruiting funnel, to really be more productive. And what do they have that we could go and work with our other sourcing sourcing partners, you know, going back to whatever the job board is, whatever the social media channels are, and really saying, what can you drive for me? What can we do differently with this to drive different candidates? And I found that, ironically, that those sourcing partners, they will go to work for you if you can provide certain information, and that kind of break-even point for new hires has been a good one for us. Again, for some positions, it's very easy to measure break even. For others, you have to get a little creative and work with, you know, I work with our CTO and say, you know, how would we measure something like this? What would this look like? And CTOs get pretty creative. So it's been fun. I would say it's still a work in progress for us. It's not perfected yet. But what I am seeing is some really unique opportunities to work with sourcing vendors to have them work for me versus just throw resumes at me. They're allowing better and stronger suggestions on how to utilize. Are there other keywords that we can use in our sourcing keyword platform, and that type of thing? And then the other piece we're looking at from a marketing standpoint is we're taking out all of the other, so cost per hire, we're taking out all the factors and just a marketing cost per hire. What does it cost us just from a marketing perspective to hire a person? What is our cost per resume application? So, and then you can start to drill that down to your churn. And again, if I've got a source providing me 5,000 resumes, but we're only hiring one person from those 5,000 resumes, I can go back and talk to them. Hey, my marketing costs don't work with you. And again, they'll come back to bat. And I've been amazed at what some of the sourcing partners will start to do if you can provide them the data of things that they're missing out on in helping get resumes. So, and when I talk sourcing, you know, again, of job boards, social media platforms, really all the sources that you use, even using it to compare your employee referral pieces. So that's something that we're constantly trying. Again, it's a work in progress right now. It was a brainchild I had as I was actually watching CNBC, but
Ryan, let me ask you this question. It's kind of around your list of sources of hire, right? And that's, to me, that's your standard list, right? They came from LinkedIn, they came from a career site, their employer referral. Does anybody look at their previous employer? Let's say they're currently working, you're recruiting them out of there. Are you looking at basically competitors, maybe not direct competitors, but indirect competitors for talent? Do you ever look at previous employer as a source and more or less like a targeted list?
Yes, absolutely. So that's one. In fact, it's one of the things that I'm doing is looking at. We have a department, and by the way, I work for a communications company that does video communications for the deaf and captioning telecommunications for the hard of hearing. So, and as we're working those telecommunications department that I'm working with, one of the things that we noticed as we go through those marketing channels and as we look at resumes to see where one of the areas that has been super successful is and these are not law enforcement positions at all. These are basically people that are installing the equipment that we build into people's homes. But law enforcement people seem to be our best source because they can go in and install, and if things aren't going quite right, they have that ability to think on their feet and put the customer at ease. They have the ability we can teach them the tech side of the installation, but that teaching them how to have a conversation and keep things calm when the customer's like, hey, this communication equipment isn't working for us. And so we've had some real success that way. And it was just something, again, picking up on those trends. So yeah, that's one thing that, and it's hard to ingrain that. It has been for me anyway, to get recruiters to think of where are people coming from through their resumes, and then how do we use that with our third-party vendors to have those discussions to help us out.
Yeah, I was just going to add, that's just great intelligence.
Yeah.
Like, intelligence gathering is what that is. We actually have a worksheet that's called, we call it a sourcing lab. Anytime we come across a new company that's a source for XYZ skill, we add that company to it. So if somebody ever says, heaven forbid to me, I can't find any more of them, I ask, did we go down the list? And if they can show me the numbers that they've done it, then I'll buy it. But otherwise, there's always more places to go hunting. It's just whether or not you've taken the time to come up with that sort of target list. And it becomes particularly important with somebody like in Ryan's organization, where you have sales or customer care, for example, that you have large numbers. You have to get really good at that. Otherwise, you'll run dry really, really quick.
Yeah, I worked at, I think this was at Dolby, when they were getting into video engineering. We identified 30 companies to target, and it was just a simple filter against the applicants. Is anytime somebody from these 30 companies applied, they went to the front of the line, right? And the goal was they get a call back same day if they come from these targeted companies. So that's why I was asking about the source piece of it. Another question for you, kind of around quality of hire from a recruiting perspective. And I know you can get into the sales because it's easier to measure if you're in a sales position, but from a quality of hire, from a recruiting perspective, are we just primarily looking at tenure? Like, did they make it past 30, 60, 90, past a year? Is that kind of how we're kind of defining quality? This is for everybody on the panel.
For me, with startups and smaller companies are probably able to do this rather than a big company, but we, as a recruiting team, we always, when we're having one-on-ones with hiring managers, we do a check-in. How's, this candidate doing? And what I like to see is where sometimes we have a candidate that the team almost didn't hire, and we decided to hire him, and then 30, 60, 90 days later, the hiring manager is like, he's the best person on the team, or she's the best person on the team. And using that data and information to remind everyone that the interview process is not a perfect vision into how someone's going to perform, right? So we do that with them, as well as doing check-ins with the candidate, because sometimes candidates are strong technically, or they have the skill sets, but they're not integrating very well with the company for some reason, or maybe they haven't found their friends and they don't feel included. So when you have those check-ins early on, you can help identify and help create some kind of a plan so that they don't leave the company, or that they stay engaged, because employees that disengage, they become a non-quality hire, right? So just wanting to make sure, why are they not engaged? Like, what's happening? And if we can do that by doing the one-on-ones, again, bigger company, probably somebody else can speak to that, but that's how we've tried to measure quality of hires for us.
Yeah, I'd
Go ahead,
agree.
Sean.
Sorry, I was going to say I'd agree with everything with Yvette, and I know Daniela mentioned this, looking at performance reviews. It's something that we've done, as well as obviously, attainment to sales goals. One thing that we're actually exploring right now is we're still kind of going through defining what questions we ask, but we want to automate a survey to hiring managers at the 90-day mark to get that sort of leading indicator before there is a known performance issue 6-12 months down the line, so we can get that signal back to recruiting quicker. I think one of the challenges we're having is working with our L&D partners to actually define, making sure at the interview stage, you're asking what is your measure of success. And then again, at the 90-day mark, you're actually assessing that. Not so much a true performance measurement, but some kind of like quick indicator that we can get at that 90-day point.
Yeah, I would quickly add to that. It's good to track positive information and back against your hires, but then also including termination data, like getting back to the source, right? Ryan, to your point, if everybody quits in 2 months from this source, you're not getting positive information back, you're getting negative information back, but nonetheless, William, to your point, that's intelligence, right? So I look, in my ATS, I match up against the HRS downstream for employees, and then I grab the term reports and pull them back to match them in there. And combining that data is when you can just drop it into a Tableau tool or a BI tool like that. So
yeah, I think we've simplified in our organization that if somebody doesn't make it to their 12-month anniversary, somehow the interview team recruiting, we missed something. Something wasn't, likely we missed something in the selection process. We do have a break-even point, even with our engineers, that we know where value is now being added to the company versus investing in the person. We're also working towards standardizing our questions with regards to across all of engineering. So we're going to start developing more of the regimental scorecards, and then that will start allowing us to grade or score not only the questions, but also the interviewer as well. So that when we look down the road and say, who did we hire? Who's the best predictor or best indicator of that? We can start looking at the questions and the people and benchmark that against. If we do hire, one of the questions we ask in performance reviews is a 9-box. If you start looking at 9-box scores, that's something that's simple, numeric, that maybe overly simplistic, people could argue, but certainly one good indication saying, how did we do in the hiring of this person, and what can we learn from that?
I think one of the important things, and that I focus with my team and the hiring managers on is being honest and with the challenges. And I think one of the things where we found, if we were struggling in that, it was where the teams were doing too much selling and not enough honesty about where things are. And where my team, the other thing I look at is, I always want my team to identify and understand any red flags. So a candidate isn't a candidate just because they said they're interested. So really try to understand, where they're not right, or where they're, and as opposed to being overly optimistic of, well, this is all the ways they are right. Hey, where are they not right? And then also really work with being honest. And some of our operations have different times of when they're open and closed. So we want to be right up front with them and say, hey, this starts at 7. If you're not an early morning person, you might lose that person. and interesting enough, I mean, another thing we've done in certain cities, one of which is Atlanta, which has a pretty challenging commute. We really try to understand how far away some of these candidates are away from the operations, and really look at where that is from their travel time, and don't just take their word for it, but really highlight, say, really this is an hour and 15-minute commute for you, based on based on Google Maps, during prime time, and make sure the hiring manager knows that, make sure the candidate knows it, because at some level, if they're doing an hour and a half, hour and 15, hour and a half commute, and they say they're willing to do it, well, maybe not if they find a job closer to their house. So, we just try to understand any red flags.
Got it. Yep, totally agree. Hey, we've gone over an hour. My apologies for going so long, but the conversation was going really good, so I appreciate it. But with that said, I don't want to keep anybody any too much longer. So, any final thoughts or comments around metric reporting? I think it's a trade or a skill that as TA leaders we're all learning and getting better at. I think as we come into the 2021 with the whole COVID pandemic, I think planning is going to be at its utmost requirement as we come out of it. Fingers crossed. But any final thoughts or comments around recruiting metrics? I will say really quick, I do have it's a PDF from a consulting company, McLean and something. It's got all kinds of metrics and all the exact formulas. I'll send that out to the group if you're interested in the math of it all to getting there. But I'm a big believer in, hey, it'd be great if we could all compare apples to apples and get as close to that as we can. But I'll kind of go really quick. Go ahead.
The only thing I would say is, it's great that that you want to capture all this information, but really, like I said, I report to John, and John's really focused on the main thing is that cost. The costs we save or the fees we save. Really understand, what the leadership really does want to see, because you can spend a lot of time capturing a whole bunch of metrics, and really they only care about one or two. And maybe you still want to capture those, but you can spend a lot of time capturing all this stuff when really they only care about two or three things. And so really understand what they want to see.
Agreed. Audience matters, right? Just quickly around the circle, Yvette, any final thoughts or comments?
Just to that point about giving them the reporting they want to see, but sometimes the reporting that you discover, and it kind of gives them a window into what really is happening in the whole entire process is really helpful. And it's your opportunity to shine as a leader and understanding of how to be better at interviewing, and how, if we give good, strong candidate experience, our outcome is going to be better. And a lot of executive leaders may not have seen those types of metrics. So it's a really good opportunity to show off that when you dig deeper into the data, you can become more efficient and effective. So I do like to give them reporting they want to see, but I do add in teaching moments where maybe it could help our overall mission to be a healthy, strong company.
Excellent. And Sean, any final thoughts or comments?
Don't forget about data quality. You spend a lot of time defining and building dashboards and metrics, and sometimes then you realize the data quality's potential issues. Focus on that first, I think, and that will help define and build what's the right things to measure.
Excellent. And William, final thoughts or comments?
I would just say embrace analytics, whether you're individual contributor, obviously up to leadership. If your company doesn't need it now, it may not need it in the future, which is not a good sign. But every company you'll be working at is going to be expecting more and more from talent acquisition to be conversant in this.
And Ryan?
Yeah, I would just say amen to what everybody just said here. And in talent acquisition, I mean, in our ATSs and CRMs, and we've probably got more data than most departments, other than maybe finance and CTOs. But we carry a lot of data, and we have things to share. And I go back to Lance, what's important, and then what's important for us, so we can make better decisions to share better data for what's important to the C-suite.
Excellent. Yeah, I couldn't agree more that one dash more doesn't answer everybody's question. They should be specific to your audience. All right. With that said, thank you very much for everybody for staying on for the time. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.